Welcome to Cybersecurity Growth, a show for aspiring and existing cybersecurity leaders. I am your co-host, Sean Valley, Managing Director and CISO of Cybersecurity Growth. I am also a musician here on Twitch and elsewhere under the name Music by SV, but more on that later. Welcome to episode number 17, SaaS Sprawl. And hello to my co-host, Garrett Gross. Hey, Garrett.
Hey, Sean. How are you?
It's Friday. I'm here. You're here. Doing well. We were just talking before we hit record that it feels like it's been a very long time since we did the show. Oddly enough.
I'm getting a sense of deja vu. Why is that?
So if anybody saw the live recording of the show the last time we did this, the last episode we had was known as episode number 17, SaaS Sprawl. We did a full show, we recorded it, we hit the publish button, and then we went and, did the rest of our day. There are some follow-up steps that usually need to take place on my part for it to get to all the places, like podcast land and YouTube land, which I neglected to do. And about 7, 8, 9 days later, I said, I gotta go publish that. And come to find out, the tool that we use to record this, which is twitch.tv, only holds your videos for, I think it's 7 days before they purge them. And I remembered it on like day 8 or 9. And then we had a couple weeks off just because we were busy. And so here we are, part due, some might say. I don't know.
It'll be better this time.
It'll be better. Episode number 17, SaaS Sprawl. So our second time around, and the few people who may have seen it live the last time, their second time around as well. But for those of you in podcast and YouTube land, first time. And welcome.
Welcome.
Here we go. So there's a story. Okay, a couple shout outs to some followers since the last time we got together. Looking over here on the Twitch machine. Just shouting out some new friends. Tac Vic, thank you for the follow. Zozer253, thank you. New Gameplay has followed us. Oh, Merely Human, I like that. Merely Human, thank you for the follow. X Alpha 65 followed us. And finally, the Caleon, I'm going to say C-A-L-E-O-N. The Caleon has followed us. So appreciate
Zozer,
that.
is that kind of like Gozer from Ghostbusters,
Gozer.
sort of?
Oh, Gozer the Gozerian.
That's right.
Gozer the Gozerian. That's so good. We had some followers over on YouTube. Thank you for everyone who's been following us on Twitch, who's been following us on YouTube, and then also subscribing on the podcast feeds. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for the support.
Yeah.
Keep doing that. Keep telling your friends.
Sincerely. Yeah, thank you.
So before we get into the show, just to give a little heads up of just the agenda, we have an agenda where we get into something called Nerd Zone, which we cover some interesting news topics that either of us have found recently. We then get into the hot topic of the week, which this week's hot topic is known as SaaS Sprawl. We cover a couple other areas as well. Sometimes we'll talk about some war stories that have impacted either of us in our real life situations. Sometimes we'll have some call-ins. If we have them, we'll deal with them as they come in. And then maybe we'll talk as humans about some of our other areas of interest in life, maybe outside of the cybers, like music or non-tech or non-security tech stuff, or just other things happening in our lives. And then
wait a minute, you have a life outside of cybersecurity?
Try,
okay.
24 by 7 by 365. I like to think of it as like 23.5 by 6.75 by 362 ish.
Very nice.
And then the rest is for me. We try to wrap up a little bit with the topics of the job market. But before we do that, we start the show every week with who are you wearing? And so, Garrett, I'm going to throw this to you to get things started. Garrett, who are you wearing today?
Well, Sean, interestingly enough, I'm wearing a shirt that says Enable MFA, but what you can't see is some ghost text that is only visible in real life that says, I know your password.
Really?
And this, you can't see it over video. And obviously for podcasters, you can't see it at all. But this was a shirt that was given out at I wouldn't say secret, because like Microsoft has parties at Black Hat and DEF CON.
Right.
Some of them are known, some of them are not known. This was at a quasi-known invite-only party, which, sorry to say, was not the greatest party. This was several years ago, but to their credit, one of the coolest shirts I've ever gotten in my entire life. I wear this shirt often. I do a lot of video calls at work, and so I like to wear this shirt because this is very central to my ethos, which is enable MFA, enable multi-factor authentication. Please, like we had a whole show about was it what United Healthcare,
United
right?
Healthcare. Yep.
Yeah, and it was all down to the fact that they did not enable multi-factor authentication. So that is who I'm wearing. It's a Microsoft shirt, believe it or not.
Unbelievable. Microsoft shirt. It's a very cool shirt. I
Thank you.
want that shirt. And it's funny, that show we did a couple of weeks back on United Healthcare, um, that show has been making the rounds in a lot of places where people are leveraging that as, data and info to help inform,
Good.
their non-security teams, like their leadership teams of, hey, guess what? Bad things can happen if you don't take care of these basics. So go
That's
take
right.
care of them. Anyways, great shirt. Great shirt.
Well, Sean, I'll turn it back to you and I'll ask. I think I have a good idea because I can see you, but why don't you tell the folks at home, who are you wearing?
So today I'm wearing a shirt known as Metasploit. Metasploit, yes.
Metasploit is a shirt company.
It's
Is that right?
they do make many shirts. I do have many shirts with their name on it. You could probably describe Metasploit as a thing better than I could. So why don't you describe what Metasploit is, and then I'll talk a little bit about like what I've used it for.
Sure. Yeah. Metasploit is a really powerful, extensible, malleable exploitation framework that allows you to really speed up your ability to perform some offensive security testing, some penetration testing type tasks, deliver payloads, set up, reverse shell connections, do some really, really tricky stuff. But I think for me, the real value of Metasploit is all the modules and things that folks in the community have been able to build to extend the functionality of Metasploit. It is, in my opinion, the world's preeminent penetration testing framework.
I was wow, you did not disappoint at all. I just threw it right to you, and then boom, you're like, I got the sales pitch on this thing. It was so good.
It's almost like I used to work there.
I remember a bunch of years ago, I was running a whole bunch of pieces of security at a company, and I was letting people know their Jenkins server was vulnerable,
Mhm.
and known exploited vulnerabilities were in the wild, and the engineers like,
that.
blah blah blah, we've got this thing protected, and it's protected in multiple different layers. So me being truly a script kiddie in my roles, got my hands on Metasploit, and I went and popped the Jenkins server, created new admin accounts, just leveraging the known vulnerable exploits. And then, I made a bad guy admin account and then showed them like, hey, check out the new admin account that didn't exist before. And, if that doesn't help, I can go make other changes to the system to demonstrate,
Right.
how far this can go.
Can burn it to the ground if you really need me to.
Love the tool. I love the tool. It helps. It helps demonstrate the business case when sometimes, you just show up with the language of like, well, hey, this is vulnerable. Go fix it. And I can go show you. I can go show
Well,
you.
and in the window between when a vulnerability is broadcast to the community and before there's like a really nice test, like a lot of vulnerabilities that are disclosed, the vendor will offer a test, like, hey, test to see if you're vulnerable. If you know what you're doing, I'm not really advocating that everyone go out and do this, but Metasploit would be a way to operationalize exploiting that vulnerability to, in your case, prove that this is still exploitable or validate that the fix has actually been effective.
Yeah, it's a good and that was it. The people were like, no, we have it all. We have it all dealt with. We don't need to patch Jenkins because it'll take our production development process offline. We've got all the controls in place to to fix that. And I came in.
Heard that before.
Yes, I came through the outside, not through the inside, and popped it. So thank you.
Love that.
Thank you to team of Metasploit. Okay. We're going to dig in first to our first area of the day, the nerd zone. We're going to bring up a couple news topics that we think are interesting. We think you might find it interesting. So, Garrett, did you have something from the nerd zone that we want to touch base on today?
I do, which is very interesting because this was, again, we're kind of redoing this show. And I talked about this topic last time, but I actually have new intel. I have new intel that I can talk about, and I also have new intel that I cannot talk about. But
maybe a year from now we can come back to it.
Or maybe a year from now we can talk about. So Santander and Santander had a breach. We talked about it last show, but then it came to light that Ticketmaster also had a breach. Well, guess what? Those two breaches are intrinsically related because they kind of the thing, well, I don't know how I should phrase this, but one of the components of that breach involved a connection to a database third party that has now kind of come to light. And, this was a prime case of understanding what your third party risk is. And what I mean by that is you may be on the hunt for breach disclosures of applications and vendors that you use, or, vulnerabilities that are discovered, things of that nature, but you're missing a huge swath of attack surface if you're not looking at the third party risk that's involved. And what I mean by that are sub-processors of data, or utilities that an application is using as, kind of part of their offering. And a great example of that would be database technology, or maybe like a connection into your customer records database, or things of that nature. And what happened with this one specifically is that a connection to a database provider was exploited. And there was, again, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty details on that, but it was allowed the attackers to make their way from this third party resource into the actual Santander and Ticketmaster customer records. And as we're seeing now, the impact has been, I think, millions of users. Like, if you've ever used Ticketmaster or Santander, and Sean, I know you're a very frequent attender of concerts. I'm not sure if you use evil Ticketmaster, but sometimes you don't have a
You
choice.
kind of
But
really have to. You kind of have to
sometimes.
Okay, here I find this interesting, and for everyone's awareness, like we didn't discuss this ahead of time.
Not at
There's
all.
certain pieces of this that I know about that you're not touching on for whatever reason that might be, but
Mhm.
the news I've gathered is publicly available, so I'm gonna join a couple pieces here that I found really interesting.
Sure.
Right, there's a data repository company, Snowflake, that's out there, and somehow their name is attributed to this, and I've heard friends and family exploring their own use of Snowflake
Mhm.
as a concern of there's a possibility that this is all tied to Snowflake and tied to not an official breach in a sense, but tied to like development accounts or free accounts, or the non the maybe the non MFA accounts, the not so well secured accounts, and possibly I actually don't know this about Santander or Ticketmaster, so now I'm just guessing from what little I've gathered out there that maybe companies are using Snowflake for different purposes and putting production data into possibly accounts that really shouldn't have ever been used for production data. Um,
Interesting.
so I'm finding a couple pieces of this super interesting. One, like, hey, is Snowflake at fault here? Is the customer of Snowflake at fault here? Is there some type of shared responsibility that has fallen down here? Um, have it's been one of those things where, like, hey, there's these either free or cheap accounts or development accounts where customers just keep using them, and maybe Snowflake isn't telling them, hey, you shouldn't use those for production because they're not the most secure. And developers are saying, hey, we're going to go use these free development accounts because they're easier to use than maybe the
Mhm.
hardened interior accounts. I'm saying these things because I've been listening to this news story as well, and I didn't even write this one down this week because we're bringing up our old topics from the show that got scrubbed from Twitch. I'm
Well,
now wondering, like,
I
how big will this become? I don't
that's
know
a
how
good
many
question.
I don't know how many Snowflake customers there are out there, but as I've had conversations, I know a lot of people who are Snowflake customers
I mean,
for,
it's a big
pieces of their
company.
business.
Yeah, it's a big company. It's a great company. They've got tons of customers. They do a lot of great work. But yeah, I mean, regardless of the kind of, intricacies and underpinnings, which I will not confirm nor deny, I would assume that a lot of finger pointing is going on right now,
Mm,
because this always happens within this kind of third party risk discussion. Because just like you said, whose fault is this? And in security, we don't like to assign blame. We just like to fix things. But regulatory compliance, insurance, the law enforcement, they certainly are interested in discovering and assigning blame. So I would bet that there's quite a lot of activity involving that. So moral of the story here: understand who all touches your data. From a personal note, I get notifications all the time that, hey, your banking information has been shared with Plaid. And if you're not familiar with that, that's like a banking intermediary, a financial instrument intermediary that, you might want to look into and just familiarize yourself with what type of data is being shared, because again, understanding that and possibly being careful about the type of information that's shared could potentially, we're not lawyers here,
No,
but could
no.
potentially save you some heartache down the road.
Yeah, I find it. I find this one interesting, and even as I walked through my thoughts right here of this potential this incident. Don't know if it's a breach. Don't really know. As I was walking through, I'm like, wait. And I could see Snowflake pointing at customers saying, "Well, you shouldn't put your stuff there," and customers possibly pointing back saying, "Well, I didn't know I shouldn't have used that."
Yep.
There's the finger pointing, and there's the shared responsibility thing that comes out of people using SaaS and cloud providers. Just interesting.
What what it makes me think of is Brian Krebs. Hopefully, if you're not familiar with Brian Krebs, you should definitely familiarize yourself. He's a great cybersecurity focused journalist out there and does a lot of investigative work himself, which oftentimes paints a target on his back, which is unfortunate, but he's kind of taken one for the team, which is nice. He blew a story, or blew the lid off of the story where Salesforce had a very easily misconfigured setting in one of their modules that allowed the leaks of tons of private data and some OG or some call them government agencies were found to be at fault. And so Brian Krebs contacted them and was like, "Hey, are you aware that this is happening?" And man, talk about finger pointing. They were very quick to point the finger back to Salesforce and say, "Well, this is their fault, and we didn't really have support from them, and this was during the pandemic, and blah blah blah." Well, I bet we can all guess what Salesforce said. They said, "That is your fault. That's a misconfiguration of a setting. And by the way, we've already published documentation on how to avoid this potential incident." So it's again a pretty contemporary topic right now, is that kind of third and fourth party breach disclosure.
If I'll be digging. We'll be digging more into this story as we learn more about it.
Mhm.
I and I'll say a thing here, and if we need to retract it the next time we come back, I'm just saying it up front. Like, this is going to be another thing where these accounts were username and password protected without MFA. And the shirt you're wearing right now, we just literally just throw it in the wash, put it back on
Enable
next
MFA.
week, because it's
Got
the same
to.
story.
I mean, I think I beat this to death during that kind of focused show that we did, but it's one of the easiest things to do to bolster your security, is to enable multi-factor authentication. Just do it. Nike, just do it.
Just do it.
This podcast, informally sponsored by Nike. Just
Just
do
do
it.
it.
MFA.
Just do
Okay.
it. All right.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What else you have? I'm not going to go through. I was looking at my old nerd zone. I love these topics that you've brought here, and I'm using all of my time to just join in on your topic. So what else did you have here?
Oh, fair enough. Okay, so Dell, dude, you got a Dell, dude, you got a breach. Dell had an incident where the names and physical addresses of about 50 million customers was disclosed. And hey, it happens to everyone. I'm not sitting here, admonishing anyone or making fun of them. I mean, unless it's the fault of not enabling MFA, then I'll definitely call you out. But these things happen. Dell's crime here, or I shouldn't say crime, but Dell's fault, misstep here, is that they downplayed the impact of this. In fact, at first they were like, "Oh no, this didn't happen. This isn't that big of a deal." Well, it was a big deal. And in across the world, we kind of deal with breaches differently and kind of the penalties associated with that. I think, and again, this is just kind of my own take on this. I think within the US, they might have just gotten a slap on the wrist. However, in Europe, things are quite a bit different, as we both know, with GDPR and whatnot. The Irish Data Protection Commission looked into it, and they are, and I'm not sure, I didn't look up the current status of this, but they are considering heavy fines against Dell as a result of breaching GDPR compliance. Could be fined up to 4% of their total annual income for these violations, which, if you think about Dell, even their small, slice of business that happens in the EU, that could be a gigantic chunk of revenue that they've been kind of removed from. So pretty interesting.
50 million customers, right? Dell's been around forever, right? If I think about the PC market,
Yeah.
Dell, they've been here for for the whole ride of it, just about.
They bought a ton of companies too.
Right. Dell, at some point, or maybe still does, owned or owns EMC, owned
Mhm.
or owns
Possibly,
RSA,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, so pieces of this. So how far and wide does it go? How far do they integrate those things? And
Right.
when you think of Dell, it's a good point you brought that up. Like, Dell's not just a PC company.
No.
They are, a massive enterprise, software and hardware
S-
company, and, security company.
Yeah. Security
Man,
services as well. So you got to wonder how, just I like your point. How far and wide reaching is that?
yeah, that's a good
Talk,
point.
Talking about third party processing and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then of course, once you 50 million people, obviously it's going to go global, and then obviously you're going to deal with the GDPR potential fines of 4% of all of their sales in Ireland, right? If you think about generally how it works,
Yeah. And
GDPR fines could be that way.
I try not to be crass on this podcast, try to keep this family friendly, but they do not F around with GDPR. Let me just tell you, that is something that there is no wiggle room with that type of stuff, which is good. I mean, that's the way it should be. I won't go on my tangent about laws in the US and blah, blah, blah. But anyway,
How we do F around.
how we do F around, and oftentimes we find out quite a bit often. Last nerd zone
Yes.
topic, and again, this is definitely a name and shame, but AT&T, the evil empire, they also had a data breach. We all know about it. If you're an AT&T customer, you probably got the communications by now. 73 million customers
Oh,
affected, and
Dell's like, we got 50, and AT&T's, oh, I got you on that one.
yeah,
73 million.
hold my beer, Dell. Yeah, exactly. And again, this is kind of a common pattern that we're seeing with these gigantic vendors. Initially, they denied it. They denied that it even happened at first, and then they downplayed the effect of it, which now it's kind of blown up, and we all realize that it actually was quite a big deal. So, for folks listening, if you are an AT&T customer or have been an AT&T customer, please check your email for that disclosure and do the needful and what you need to do to kind of clean up your records. Definitely change all your passwords. It's the real deal.
So
So again, not trying to.
do you know what type of data was in there? Was it, username, password data? Was it, other personal identifiable data? Do we have any info on that?
Um, yeah, I believe it was username and password, like credential type data. You can use Have I Been Pwned, which if you're not familiar with Have I Been Pwned, that's a service that you can just plug in your personal information. They'll go right through all the breach disclosures and see if you were a part of that. But yeah, it's credential based.
All right.
Um,
So
so
note to self, if you're like, oh, I still have this same password that I've been using for the last 17 years, today
shame
might
on
be a
you.
great day, and it may or may not be your AT&T password. Today just might be a good idea to change it, because
Yeah,
chances
just
are,
change it.
if you think that way, your AT&T password is the same as your Facebook password, is the same as your Bank of America password. Maybe time to get a fresh one.
And again, like we're not shaming you about
No.
this, but hey, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is right now.
Yeah.
So go change that password and use a password manager.
Use a
Come
password
on,
manager. Yeah.
use a password manager.
Yeah. Let that manage them all for you and get fresh ones.
Right.
All right. All right. That's our nerd zone for the day. That's a good one. That was a good nerd zone. There's so much more news out there. There's so many things I want to bring up that aren't even listed in the rundown. Like, we got to save it for next time. But it is what it is.
We've already planned our next show, and
We did.
again, I don't know if this is against the rules, but we will be talking about the Verizon DBIR, the data breach investigation report, which is something that nerds like me will read, cover to cover. And if you don't have time to do that, you can read the executive summary. They provide a really nice enumeration of that. But yeah, we'll be talking about plenty of stuff in that topic.
An upcoming topic. I like how you said the DBIR. You just like use the acronym as it's an actual English word. The Verizon Data Breach and Incidents Report. I think that's
investigation report.
I
think.
Okay, thank you.
We'll see.
So we'll get into that. They just released their 2024 version of that report. They've been doing it for, I think, like 17 years now. So we'll get into that possibly next show. That's a possible plan.
Yep.
Let's get into our hot topic today.
Let's do it.
So our hot topic today is titled SaaS Sprawl, and for those who aren't seeing this on video and you're not reading the text in the podcast, SaaS, Software as a Service, Sprawl. And if you think about the idea of, working in an organization, a company, an enterprise where there's lots of software that employees can install and use, and maybe there aren't always controls in place to make sure that employees don't install stuff that they haven't been authorized or approved, or maybe employees don't even realize, oh wait, it's just like a little keyboard add-on that I want to use. It's no big deal. It's a little window that allows me to print screen stuff real quickly, or it's a little window that just like helps me, a little app that helps me snap windows from side to side, or it's an application that helps me manage all of our financial data, because the actual financial data system we have, just I don't like the way the UI looks. So I bought I downloaded and installed this add-on that allows me to filter all of my company's financial data through this unapproved third-party app. SaaS.
Or it's a magical little browser window that I open and it writes all of my marketing content for me, a la ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, SaaS Sprawl. So Garrett brought this topic to us a couple weeks ago. We talked about it the last time we got together. We're talking about it again today. Garrett, SaaS Sprawl, I gave you my intro. I like bringing the layman's terms of the idea of like people just install stuff thinking it's going to help them get their job done. And the next thing you know, you just have this massive amount of, in a sense, tech debt. So why don't you give us an intro to this thing?
Yeah, so let's provide some delineation here. We've come a long way from my early days in IT and security to where we controlled everything from a technology standpoint, because we were mostly concerned with locally installed stuff on desktops first and foremost. Then it was laptops, things that were installed or addressed via the network. We still had this kind of centralized concept of control. Well, you fast forward to today, where the predominant technology form factor is a SaaS application. Think about, Gmail, Salesforce. Even like Netflix, ChatGPT. I would wager a bet that most organizations at this point have the majority of their critical infrastructure hosted in these off-premises apps, these apps that are hosted elsewhere. And so that is kind of the big problem. And the issue is that a lot of us in IT and security that have had this control over time, we've recognized that there's a growing issue that's ever evolving with this change in decentralization of this adoption, but we haven't really changed our approach to managing this technology. And we're still trying the same, blocking methodologies that we tried in the past, because again, when we controlled the environment or we controlled the network, we could block things and we could prevent you from installing applications on your laptop. But the way, my current boss right now talks about it, your laptop is just like, it's a remote control. You could take your laptop, you could throw it in a lake, and in an hour's time, you could be back up and running with all of your access that you had, because the majority of the stuff that you have on that on that laptop is just addressing web apps. It's credentials, it's identity is the real kind of linchpin these days.
Yeah, it's true. Chrome is like the primary. It is a crazy thing to think about this. Maybe there's a future episode where we're talking about enterprise browsers. But
Oh yeah.
Chrome, I said Microsoft, Google Chrome is probably the most used enterprise application, physical application these days, because
Absolutely.
everything is a SaaS application that lives in the browser. And we're using Chrome, just a consumer piece of technology to kind of run our business, and then everything is living in SaaS. But I'd love for you to share a little bit about some of the numbers you have seen out there in the world of SaaS.
Yeah, let's talk about real quick the shift in adoption has the form factor has changed, but the shift in adoption has changed as well. Used to, you'd have to go to your IT team and ask for approval to install something, because usually, again, we were the folks that were provisioning that access for you. But now what it looks like, someone's going to go out, they're going to pick the technology that they want to use, they're going to try it out, usually without asking you, and then only until they decide to ask for your permission, or maybe they need to pay for it, or they need to upgrade to the pro version, are IT and security even made aware of this? And this could be weeks, this could be months after the initial adoption. So by the time you find out about the existence of the SaaS app usage, it's already too late to prevent the things that you're trying to prevent.
Yeah, those old guardrails we used to have, which love them or hate them, the application-based guardrails, like you can't install a piece of software until you get some type of approval, and we've got a block on the network to not allow like admin access to install stuff. That doesn't exist in SaaS, right? It's a website. At the end of the day, it's a website that is a fully functional application, and then through APIs, you get to connect, corporate data into this website, but there's still no install application to do that.
Well, and I can imagine some of our listeners are going, "Well, just block it." Well, we're going to talk about that here in a second. But first, let's kind of front load this, as you said, with some scary stats that I have prepared. Back in 2018, basically a lifetime ago, Gartner, which hopefully everyone's familiar with Gartner, they're a pretty well-known IT and cybersecurity analyst group. They predicted that 1/3 of all successful cyber attacks will be on data stored in shadow IT infrastructure. Shadow IT is just basically the infrastructure that IT and security are not aware of, and they're not able to manage, kind of stuff that's outside of their purview.
My joke is the other 2/3 is most likely just on the Microsoft platforms. Sorry.
I mean, you're probably not too far off, quite honestly. So fast forward 3 years from there, in 2021, studies showed that more than 50% of technology budgets sit outside of IT. So now we're talking about well-defined, known technology that's just not even I mean, maybe within IT's awareness sphere of influence, but they're not controlling it. They're not really provisioning access to that. They're just kind of shepherding, that type of
Yeah,
access. I can think of like,
in thinking about our audience here, like you could picture, in the HR department has some type of HR information system, a Workday, a
right.
UKG, something like that.
Yep.
Does
Sales
IT
team
does
has
IT pay for
Salesforce.
that? Probably not. Probably HR pays for. Yeah, Salesforce, probably the sales team owns that, and they pay for it out of their budget. So that's kind of the idea of like IT isn't the central home for a lot of core applications. At a lot of every company's different, but a lot of companies are like this.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say today the majority of companies are like this, to where IT, and again, I'm a lifelong IT person.
Mm-hmm.
Like I see IT now as like just, Wi-Fi access points and like provisioning physical equipment and things of that nature that,
And core productivity, right? The core productivity suites are
right,
usually
right.
theirs, and the core communication suites are theirs. But yeah, if you think
Well,
like your marketing team, Marketo, and all those cool tools they use, I'm sure
that's
they're
right.
paying for it themselves and managing that stuff themselves. And you see that with the HR stuff, finance applications, you see it being paid for and managed in finance, and et cetera, et cetera.
But I'm here to tell you it is time to take that control back, IT. We can do this together,
Okay,
okay?
okay, okay.
So yeah, we just some other scary stats. We saw that 74% of employees are willing to bypass your cybersecurity guidance if it helped them or their team achieve a business objective. Basically saying going around your request to get this stuff approved if they felt that they needed this to do their job done. That is almost 3/4 of your employees are willing to do this. So we should just call that everybody,
Yeah, and if you think
essentially.
about it, like we all in our careers talk about the fact of kind of security and user experience, and they usually don't go hand in hand. And oftentimes, if the user experience for the end user is impacted because of painful security, they're going to find a way around it, right? They're going
Absolutely.
to do what they can to get around that. So yeah, the number's a scary number, but also doesn't surprise me. And it continues to be one of those things that, hey, in our industry, security and user experience, how do we continue to make that better so we're not impeding people wanting to protect stuff and stay secure,
That's
while
right.
also making their life, relatively easy.
So, due to this ability to kind of skirt IT and security, fast forward to the stat of, I believe this was in 2023, 98% of cloud services are adopted without any IT oversight. And that includes a lot of evaluation software. But I mean, let's be real, with the permissions that we have granted, a lot of folks can set up these evaluation versions of software, hook it up to a sensitive code repo, and boom, Bob's your uncle. You're
Yeah,
now
for
sharing your data.
it's a great example. You think about it, your software engineering teams, your cloud engineering teams, they go out and use the corporate credit card to buy their first AWS account, right? And that's how it starts, right? They just kind of get it started. Or for example, someone says, "Hey, let's go try out the Snowflake thing. Let's go, let's go buy a quick dev account on Snowflake and just start building on it." Next thing you know, that little dev account becomes production. Next thing just rewind the
Yeah.
show 15 minutes.
So, I mean, in addition to just the fact that folks are signing up for this stuff without your purview, the another risk that's just kind of intrinsically involved with this is because you're not aware of this, you're usually not applying the same level of scrutiny or even security controls to these SaaS
Yeah, and you
applications.
think about some of our audience, right? Some of our audience is the people who have to own the policies, the IT policies, the security policies, the acceptable use policies. Like some of our listeners, that's their area of ownership and expertise. And all the things you're talking about, those people, the people who are going around the IT policies aren't thinking about policies. They're not bringing the infosec policy and saying, hey, are we following all the bullets in the policy here? They're just using the tool they need to get their job done. And so you're right. You don't have the folks that are empowered to enforce controls involved here. And so people are going,
Well,
people who are using these tools may not, put in the level of protections that align with the company's risk.
but Sean, as a CISO, think about how would you respond to someone saying you now need to have a policy that covers all SaaS applications, and you need to be aware of all the use, and you need to control all the access and stuff like that. That's not tenable from
No,
a workflow perspective. I don't think anyone would sign up for that given the current climate, because again, you're usually only applying those controls to your most critical SaaS apps. But as we've talked about in the nerd zone, what is your most critical SaaS app? It's anything that provides access, which is all of them.
yeah, it's the thing is, like, people say the most critical apps are the ones that are the most well known, that are most identified. Your productivity apps, your big sales apps, like, again, like
That's right.
Salesforce, for example. Your communication tools, your Slacks, your Teams, things like that.
Yeah.
But a lot of stuff gets, this is where your security team's always spending their life doing inventory gathering. Always like, hey, well, we've got some time to hunt. Let's go hunt for inventory so we know where our gaps are. And still needs to get kind of written into policy. So the idea is, even though we know we'll never find everything, at least currently with the way things are working, maybe there's a future where we can. We write into policy that our scope is, any type of technology that's used within the organization. But again, you spend your life hunting for new inventory to then go reach out to those folks and say, okay, hey, how
Well,
do we put some controls here?
very few organizations have that availability of resources. Like very few orgs have someone at the ready that can just go hunt for new applications. It's usually part of someone's job to maintain that inventory, which, as we'll discuss here in a sec, doing that manually is just not tenable. The last risk I want to talk about is something that we've already discussed, is that people lie to themselves a lot. They talk about this, shared responsibility security model, and they don't really understand what that means. Like the case of Salesforce, and oh, that's their fault. They didn't give us the support. It's like, no, it's your fault for not reading the documentation. Things like I've heard, I have my hands full with what I know about. Like, I'm sorry, what?
You
How
you
is that
just
going to help you in a breach?
you just
How's it going to
reminded me
help you
of
when you get sued?
something where there were I was with a cloud software company, without going into the details of the company, and some of our clients were asked by their external auditors, are you so and so compliant, XYZ compliant? Are you compliant with this thing? And they would answer their auditors honestly, yes, we are compliant. And then when pressed, somehow, again, this is a customer of a company that I work for.
Mhm.
Somehow their auditor gets to my desk and calls me and says, I just want to validate that, this customer that we're auditing says they're compliant with this thing. Are you compliant with this thing? And I said, well, if I am, that doesn't mean they are.
Right.
I'm not their compliance team. I'm not making sure their tools and their infrastructure are compliant. The software that they use of mine,
Mhm.
yes, yes, it is, but that doesn't mean they are. And so that was a rinse repeat thing, which I found bonkers, that uh, people of SaaS software, customers of SaaS software, will just look at the SaaS vendor and say, "Oh, the SaaS vendor has a SOC 2, has been ISO certified,
Right.
is HIPAA compliant," and they'll say that means we are too.
Yeah,
Back to the shared responsibility, which is that's not how it
that's not
works.
how that works. That's not how that works at all. Another one would be I'm compliant about the things that I know about. We used to hide it behind that a lot because you know what? That was a defense that worked. But you fast forward to today, that is not
No.
a defense that works. You look at like changes to cyber insurance, changes to regulatory compliance. They now mandate that you have to know about all of this technology. So the days of kind of hiding behind that, I think are over. So let's talk about some of the common approaches that we see to manage this risk that SaaS Sprawl presents, and I'll kind of break it down to three main categories because there's really only three. No matter when I talk about this publicly, I usually challenge people and I say, how many of you have shadow IT? And, I'll be like, trick question because you all do. How many of you think you have this under control? And if they say they do, I genuinely want to hear what their approaches are because, again, it's not meant to name and shame, but you can whittle it down to one of three categories. You can ignore the problem, you can embrace the problem, or you can block the problem. Now, ignoring, Sean, I think you and I both know that that does not work. Burying your head in the sand these days, like we just said, saying, "Well, this is what I know about." That's not gonna help. I think we can just kind of fly through that one and all agree that ignoring the problem is going to get you in a lot of hot water and probably sued twice.
Yeah,
You can embrace.
that's like the bury your head in the sand approach, which then I think is the negligence.
That
That's the word the lawyers would say.
That is exactly correct. And again, like I joke about you get sued twice, but you actually do because you now get blamed for negligence, not just messing up, but like you willfully ignored, guidance from whomever. You can embrace the SaaS sprawl, which just going to put it out there, definitely the hardest approach of the three. But I believe that's the one that's going to net you the most positive results because be like water, just kind of, figure out how to deal with this. We talk about don't be the department of no, be the department of how. This is going to net you the most positive results because as you talked about earlier, if you come in and just try to block this stuff, it's just going to drive people underground. So embracing this kind of getting your users as part of this conversation. It's going to make them feel involved. And you may say, well, it's not my job to make my users feel involved, but it actually is because the more you involve them in these conversations, the more attuned they are to what the actual mission is. The more likely that they're actually going to adhere to your acceptable use policy, and the more likely they're probably to adhere to other policies out there.
Yeah, the word embrace. You think over the last year and a half, all security folks, cybersecurity type folks have been asked, what are your thoughts on LLMs, Chat GPT, right? Are you blocking it? Are you, allowing it? And it is a new technology that is not going away. It's going to continue to grow and evolve. And what do we need to do? We need to embrace it and figure out how we roll it in. That is the life of technology. New technology is created. We're here to help embrace that and enable
That's
folks
right.
to securely use that. And we can go back in time to when the cloud became like as huge as it is. I can bring myself back to 2015, 2014. And, my entire security team was saying if it's not on-prem, it's not for me because, initially we weren't embracing the cloud and we didn't think the cloud was ready for us and vice versa. But that's the reality. Like the cloud's not going anywhere. It's because you now have auditors saying, do you have any on-premise software left? And if so, when are you getting rid of it? Because
Right.
cloud and SaaS is the way of the future. And we can go back 20 something years, 30 something years before that, and like the internet, connections. Are you on the internet? So, we are here to help folks. We are here to embrace tech as it comes out and help folks safely and securely use that tech. It's, hearing these three things: ignore, the lawyers are going to say negligence, embrace is the way forward. Yeah, it's hard work, but that's kind of why we're here.
Well, let's talk about the unfortunate usual knee-jerk reaction to the SaaS sprawl and really to other things, as you alluded to, is trying to block this stuff. Okay.
We did this for
Um,
years, right? These application security
sure.
tools that are, someone can't install something until it's approved. And of course, how
I
long is it
mean,
going
I've
to take
made
to
a
approve a thing?
career out of proving that those things don't work. Like, and I mean, I'm not purporting to be anyone special. Like your average user, you try to block their efforts of again, trying to do things that they're using to try to get their job done, they're going to find a way around it. Because if you think of this just from a practical standpoint, how are you going to block things in 2024? Are you going to lock the network down? Well, what's a network these days? Um,
Right. Yep.
your perimeter extends to these things. And for your folks at home, I'm holding up my mobile device. That is the biggest threat to our security, I think, out there is the fact that people don't understand the perimeter extends to your mobile devices. So yeah, what are you gonna do? Lock the network down, lock your devices down. Well, again, I'm just gonna hop on another network. I'm just gonna hop on another device. Or for the enterprising folks out there, I'm gonna take it as a personal challenge to figure out how to get around those controls.
How to get around and not be noticed.
That's right. That's right. There are approaches out there, like cloud access security brokers or CASBs that work really, really well. But here's the deal: they work really well for the applications that you know about. You can filter out information. You can, and again, CASBs are great because you get a really great depth of understanding how these applications are being used. But again, you're missing, as we talked about earlier, the majority of the applications that are being used if you're only focusing on the things that you know about. And then again, locking the environment down, it's just not gonna work. I mean, just from a political standpoint, how about this one, Sean? Hypothetically, I'll create a policy that says you can't have remote access tools. Well, what happens at the end of the quarter when sales wants to show off a feature to a prospective client and they need remote access to a production instance in your environment? Who's going to win?
Sales.
Sales will win every
Sales.
single time. So even just from a political standpoint, that's not going to happen. And I joke all the time, just like with children, what's the one thing that you can say to a child to make sure that they do a thing? Tell them you can't do
Tell
that.
me you can't do it.
So
Tell me you can't do it. I'll go do
you
it.
can't do it. And I mean, here's the deal. We're all just larger versions of children. So again, I'm kind of beating this one into submission, but blocking does not work from a practical standpoint. It does not work from a political standpoint. And it's just not gonna work well for you in the long term. Like even if you realize some modicum of success doing this, it's not going to last. Your users are going to get mad at you. You're going to be that department of no that comes in heavy handed and says, you can't use this. And again, it's not going to work out. So what I think, and before I move on to what I think we should do, Sean, any kind of thoughts on blocking here?
This is a difficult one. You've seen organizations like this. I've seen organizations like this. We've talked about it before, where you see an organization where the inventory of applications was never really done well. It was like a fractional part of someone's job, and then we come in to help secure an organization, and we realize, wait, this is a very difficult organization to secure because you have hundreds, maybe thousands of applications that are non-sanctioned, that are shadow IT, and we it can be a lifetime to get our arms around all of these applications, to know which ones are leaking data inadvertently because people are connecting them to core production systems,
Yep.
which ones are just duplicate and there's no need for us to have like multiple versions of a spreadsheet enhancer.
Right.
So it's tough because I've seen environments where there's just so many applications, and the starting point was, in a sense, not that we're not going to allow applications, but we're going to nuke them.
Right.
We're going to basically shut off all of this external access, kind of do a scream test approach, and
That's
as
right.
people scream, we're going to get them their access right back. But so I think there's a couple things just from a blocking perspective. There might be that like one-time approach to blocking because the organization was just never well managed and it is out of control, and
Yeah.
there's no controls in place. So it's not a lack of embracing, it's a lack of like trying to get coverage back. I think
Right.
the concept of long-term blocking is not realistic. It's because it's the idea of like there's going to be more growth and more technology, and folks are going to want to embrace that technology. And in many cases, we want to, depends on your organization, every company is a little bit different, but the idea of encouraging folks to say, how can we leverage new technology to do our job better, to serve
That's right.
this place we work at more effectively and more efficiently? And if we block things, well, are we now limiting people's ability to be effective and efficient? In the long run, if block is the approach, yes, but I do believe in sometimes short-term block approaches of saying like we just need to clean things up and then we can continue to grow from there. There's
Yeah.
there's kind of a mixed feeling when I think of this.
Well, don't misconstrue. I'm not saying that you can't block anything anymore. It's just more of that blocking without context and blocking without having that conversation of like, here's a better way to do this. Like in the case of remote access tools, like something that I faced at an environment that I won't talk about, is, there are a lot of remote access tools going around without my knowing. And it was, usually SaaS applications like ngrok comes to mind, which is a great tool. I love it. I think it's fantastic, but used in an unsecure way, it can really, really expose yourself to threats. But what we did is we said, hey, listen, there's a better way to do this. Let me show you about Bastion hosts. Let me show you a very secure way to get the same exact performance and accessibility that you want to these production systems without just, throwing the keys out to anyone out there who's listening, which is often the times problems with these tools that are signed up without, any IT security purview. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to talk about the financial risk that this SaaS sprawl presents as well. But you just talked about duplicate apps out there. The amount of waste that we see, I mean, there's like another scary stat that I didn't get to is like $135,000 worth of software is wasted on average every single year. And that's significant because that's like more than a full-time employee that you could hire to actually do some of this work. So, um, kind of done with the threats and stuff like that. What are we going to do about this?
Yeah.
I don't want to just sit here and talk about how scary this is and how you're just kind of screwed. Like, how do we actually kind of move forward with this? I'll kind of give my thoughts about this. I think you need to start with discovery and visibility. Okay, you can't secure what you don't know about. But the problem with this is you need to do this continuously, and that's where that kind of challenge comes in because oftentimes I see a lot of teams struggle with this because they'll go whole hog into that kind of first volley of discovering everything out there. They'll troll the network. They'll ask all their users. They'll, have some sort of aggressive, approval policy or something like that. But here's the deal. It's so much to consider and so much to kind of keep up with that it oftentimes kind of falls off the radar because they lose sight of success. It becomes a untenable solution to do this, especially from a manual perspective.
Discovery and visibility. I couldn't agree with you more on that. I think it's, thinking of the world of, I know we're not in vulnerability management today, but that's one of the key pieces to finding out where are you vulnerable in the company. First thing you need to do is
That's right.
discover the things we have. What are our assets? And oftentimes we just think of like our computers and servers as assets, but just our things. What are the things we have? Let's discover, let's find out what we have so we know
Yep.
what we can do about it. And I think you said something really important. You don't do it once and done with it. It is something that becomes kind of like a regular part of your ongoing forever program of
Well,
continuing
and
to
you need to do this
discover.
from an automated fashion too, because again, doing this manually is not possible. There are solutions out there that do this from an automated fashion. I may or may not work for one of those solutions right now. It's not the reason about talking about this. I'm not plugging my product, but I am definitely advocating for this approach. You need to do this from an automated fashion, and this needs to be someone's job to constantly be looking out for these new applications that are added in.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Um, I'd say another scary one or kind of threat to this is that once you discover something, what's the next step? You got to do research. You have to learn about what this thing is. You need to understand, okay, now I know about this tool. Well, what is the risk that the use of this solution is actually, providing to my organization? And am I willing to accept that risk?
Massive time consumption, right? If you think about, so what
Huge.
you just highlighted was third party risk assessment, third party risk
That's right.
management, vendor risk assessment, risk management. It is a very expensive piece of your security program to staff and to operate, and massively time consuming and historically very manual.
That's right. That's right. So the problem with this, as I think we can all kind of, see what I'm about to say, is that as soon as you're done with that, you have to do it over again. And you have to do it over again and over again and over again. You have to constantly be discovering and adding context to the risk that this application use is providing to your organization. Because again, this changes on a daily, if not hourly basis of what these applications touch, who's evaluating software out there, and yeah, integrating it with a sensitive code repo. I mean, it's just stuff like that. So the real kind of point that I'm making is that you have to do this very quickly because you have to intervene in time to prevent these things. Because again, like we talked about embracing, Sean, if you're able to discover the use of an application, you reach out to this user and you say, hey, I understand you're using this. Totally cool. Let's talk about how you're using it and maybe provide some more secure approaches to accomplish a similar goal. That is the key to actually thwarting these threats.
It's interesting, as you mentioned, like there's solutions out there,
Oh
for
yeah.
this.
Hmm.
That in itself is interesting because if I think about third-party, risk management, it's something that auditors often ask. I just sometimes point back to that because oftentimes, why do we do some things? Well, because we're supposed to because of an audit. But
That's right.
auditors are asking for that. But it's also an important thing to recognize, like as we have software in our companies, what's the risk of this software existing to our organization? Is it a low, medium, or high risk? Because
Right.
that's a big part of what our job on the cyber side of things is to help companies understand where things are risky, to help people make business decisions based on risk. And so, if we can quickly come up with a list of like, hey, here's all the things we found and here's the risk level of each of those things, it's going to help your third party risk management program move along. And it's really a key piece to what we're trying to do for the companies we work with.
Well, and it helps you slice it up and prioritize your efforts too, so you're not just like hit with this giant, here's 4 weeks worth of work that you have to do. Again, you can make that kind of business decision. So I couldn't agree with you more on that. So in summary, what we're talking about here, just to kind of recap, this decentralized technology adoption where, it's mostly SaaS apps, mostly your users kind of signing up for them without your approval or whatever, that is the new reality. Okay, again, for those stalwarts, that's the wrong word, for those folks that would dig their heels in the
I'm still
sand.
half a stalwart, so it's fine.
Yeah,
It's
whatever.
fine.
What did you just call me?
Nothing.
For those folks that are digging their heels in the sand about like, oh, well, I'm just going to lock my environment down because blah blah blah. It's not possible anymore. That known way of technology, managing that technology introduction, it does not work anymore. And if you're sitting there and you perceive this as a problem, it's only going to get worse. So your only choice at this point is to adapt to this new reality and then evolve your approach because again it's a constantly moving target. People like to call it a shifting landscape, and if we are not constantly adapting and evolving, we're going to get caught with our hand in the cookie jar and again get in a lot of hot water and possibly have fines and or jail time. You never know. We put CISOs in jail now, Sean.
I've heard. I've heard. Not a big fan. Not a fan at all.
Not a fan.
I'm thinking I want to go back to becoming a full-time musician again.
I couldn't agree more. I'll go back to hand modeling myself.
Oh, that's fantastic. This is a good topic. I'm glad we brought it. Thank you, Garrett, for bringing your expertise and knowledge here to
Absolutely.
it. And it's also, I think it should at least open up some folks' eyes of not only the concept of SaaS sprawl isn't surprising anyone, but knowing that wait, maybe there's some solutions out there that we can dig into that can help us discover our never-ending growth of SaaS applications that is wider than a CASB. I think that's important to know. CASB's been out there for years. It's kind of making in a sense like another comeback because it's built into the Microsoft E5 platform. The what is it called today? Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, right? It's Microsoft's CASB that's like built right into their platform, so it's making a comeback. But it requires you to kind of know what you have, and so something that can help you discover what's out there, very helpful. Something that can help you identify third-party risk, very helpful, because third-party risk management is massively time-consuming. And
Well, Defender's a great tool,
great
and
tool.
their discovery capability extends the network as well. But as we've discussed, what is the network? Does
What
that
is the
network
right?
involve? Does that involve your mobile devices? Does that involve people working remotely? Um, I hate to go into this, but there's a common approach of like, we're going to use an always-on VPN and feed all of our information through home office. Like, guess what? That doesn't work either. For reasons that I just won't go into on record. We can talk about it offline, but that just does not work at all.
It's fantastic. I love this stuff. I love this stuff. I love us dealing with these challenges and just being right up front with it. So thank you, Garrett.
Yeah, no worries.
We're going to, I have one quick war story. I don't know if I said this one previously, but I wrote it in our rundown, so I thought I would share it. There was a scenario I was involved in many, many, many moons ago where I was responsible for securing an infrastructure of a cloud product that was used by our customers. So, business to business cloud product. And a notification came across my desk from a quote unquote third party security researcher that had informed me that they had our customers um, data of products purchased. So not our direct customer, but our customer's customer data. So if you think about our product is, a business to business product, but then our customers use that product to give products, sell products to their consumers. And so I get this message, a third party research says, oh, I have your customers purchase data. Here's a little sample of it. I'm just going to put a little sample of it on Pastebin just so you can see that I have it. And I have many of your customers' data and their customers' data. And so the question goes around: wait, was there a breach? And the security researcher came back and said, well, no, there was a vulnerability in the application where I was able to look at records that were basically session codes were right in the URL. So I could just numerate stuff, I'd take a URL, put a 0, and then put a 1, and then put a 2, and then put a 3. And every time it would show up, I would get another record on my screen. So then I created a script and just pulled them all. And so there was a question of like, wait, was there even a breach? was anything actually breached? And so without us going into the details, because this is just a little bit of a piece of a war story. And the next piece of this is, here comes the extortion request, which Absolutely. Because, our friendly security researcher says, hey, so I would like a bug bounty payout.
We would call those beg bounties, by the way.
Big bounties, because I found this information. Now, the org I was at that time was well before there was such thing that we had a bug bounty in place. So we didn't have a bug bounty program. This person was not following on by any type of bug bounty disclosure process. In the end, was somewhat of an extortion request is really the easiest way to look at it. Of, I stole some data. I found a way to steal some data pretty easily by being a little hacker nerd. And here's the amount of money I want, so I don't expose you and all this data going forward. And of course, we spun up all of our incident response machines at that point to go do all the right things. And I won't go into any more detail, but real world war story right there, just bits and pieces of it that we can share from time to time.
And folks, if you're getting a lot of those beg bounties, I wouldn't necessarily ignore them. I would communicate with those folks and just say that, just be like, hey, we don't have a bug bounty program. Thank you very much for submitting this, but sorry, we don't have anything for you. If you do feel like remunerating them somehow, you can offer swag.
We've done that. We've done that before. Like, hey,
100%. It's a shirt.
Be extremely appreciative. You are the best. Thank you so much for finding this vulnerability. We're going to go fix this right away. Let me send you a box of like $50 worth of t-shirts and hats with the company name on it.
Sure.
And sometimes
it's just free advertising anyway.
Yeah, sometimes it actually matches up really well. Like, wow, this is great. I got recognition, and I was just messing around because I found a cool little glitch somewhere, a little bug somewhere. So anyways, let's be humans for a second. The show's getting close to wrap up time, so let's be human for a second.
Okay, fine.
Just for a second, something out of the cybers. Garrett and I were talking about this earlier. One of my favorite bands came out with a new record this week. I just happen to have it next to me here, and I got a piece of yellow vinyl in front of me, which is just very cool.
Very cool.
The band 21 Pilots just came out with their 7th studio album. And that was like a week or two ago. I've been pretty much listening to it nonstop, so I'm always excited when some new music comes my way from a group that I love, or if I learn something new. But I was looking forward to these guys releasing some new music. And when we get off this, I'll probably drop the needle down on that thing and give it a spin.
Love that.
Yeah.
My being human piece is just going to be a bit of advocacy, and this is just some self-reflection. When we talked about this last time, I was telling Sean about how we're going to, and the audience who's listening live, I was going to go meet some friends at a tiki bar. I don't really get out and go to bars that much often. I don't know if it's just a carryover from the pandemic or just being a dad these days, but I just don't really do it often. I'm here to tell you, you absolutely should. Force yourself to get out of the house, especially if you're like me and you're a remote or a hybrid remote worker. Get out of the house. Go see people. I missed that human interaction so much, and really, you don't really understand how much you miss it until you kind of get a taste of it again. And this wasn't a go out and get sauced and go bar hopping. This is just a casual meetup with some old buddies and go go to a really fun, interesting tiki bar. We ended up having a ton of laughs. This tiki bar was in swift decline, so we were making fun of it left and right. But it's just a really good kind of reminder to go out and be with other humans. Speaking about being human, and then directly related to that, because all of us are hardworking, I mean, cybersecurity can be a very hard and unforgiving and grueling job. Take care of yourself. Like self-care. This is a term that when I heard it the first time, I was like, what is this? Some, buzzword that we're getting from, some rando blog out there. It's a real thing. Self-care, as it turns out, is a real thing. Take breaks, schedule breaks in your day, go outside, get some vitamin D. I am not the bastion of physical fitness or anything like that, but I've been forcing myself to go ride a bike on a regular basis. And again, I'm not getting jacked. I'm not out there with trying to join a triathlon or anything, but I cannot tell you the mental clarity that I've been getting from riding a bike and just getting some cardio in every day. My body feels better. I've got a young daughter, so like chasing her around, I'm kind of moving slow. It's been pretty difficult, but over the past couple years, my fitness has improved quite a bit, and I've just been found that I have a lot more energy. I'm able to keep up with my kiddo. It's again not to get on some crazy fitness soapbox, but like whatever you can do to get outside and just kind of get a little bit of activity, just do it. Again, Nike sponsor. Thank you for the sponsorship, Nike.
Once
Just
again,
just do it.
Let's just do it. All right. I'm going to fast forward us, just watching the time, being thoughtful for everyone paying attention, listening, and also us as well. We
Yep.
will bring us right into the That's a Wrap section.
Perfect.
Another great show. We are potentially... You don't hold us to this, but we're potentially going to do a show next week. We're now in the summer months, so lots of vacations for our listeners, for ourselves, and so we're going to work around vacation schedules. So very possibly stay tuned for us to do a show next week. If we can get our act together, maybe we will get into the Verizon data breach and investigations report. We'll see. But we want to thank everybody for listening and watching our webcast, our live stream, our podcast. I'm Sean Valley. I'm the creator of the show and the music here on Cybersecurity Growth. You can find us at cybersecuritygrowth.com. You can find all of our shows at cybersecuritygrowth.com/blog. You can find me online at just about all the places, either under @SeanValley or @CybersecurityGrowth. If you like the show, please tell your friends. If you hate it, tell all the bad guys. Tell everybody to come on over here. Please like the show, subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you could leave us a thumbs up or a 5-star review, maybe a message that says, great show. I learned something about MFA today and how to MFA all the things, whatever it is. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate you spreading the word.
Yep.
Garrett, where can people find you?
Well, I'm Garrett Gross. I'm the official, most of the time, co-host of Cybersecurity Growth and chief legal counsel as well. You can find me on the bike trails and hanging out at your local bike shop and repair center.
It's fantastic. It's oftentimes I'll be looking for Garrett, and I will just kind of park over towards like the wooded area and just kind of walk through the woods where it looks like there's some tire marks, and occasionally I will find Garrett there, possibly pumping up the tire, or
covered in burrs and sweat usually.
Oftentimes with binoculars, a little birding. It's usually birding off into the woods with the bike. It's fantastic.
I would never.
Okay, this week we covered SaaS Sprawl. We are live on Twitch every other week. That is somewhat of a lie, somewhat of a truth.
Sort of.
We are here Fridays at approximately 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time.
Give or take 24 to 48 hours.
And oftentimes 6:30 p.m. GMT. And we are in your pod feeds a few days later. And this time around, we will actually be in your pod feeds a few days later versus a few weeks later. We want to thank you for joining. We appreciate y'all being here. We'll catch you all next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Take care.